that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Finnell. I'm George. This is Tom.
I'm Tom.
And with us we have Steve Goldsmith and Patty Kenyon and Melissa
Chestnut Tangerman.
Chestnut Tangerman.
Mm-hmm.
That almost sounds like a nut and a fruit.
People have done chestnut tangerine. It's been done.
Okay, who are the head people from SolarFest? And it's a real thrill to have them here. But I want to start out with a couple of things, one of which is I really want to thank BCTV for what they've done, and I want people to be able to appreciate the amount of work they're doing to support this show. And I just think it's a joy to come in here and do this, and I think that people should understand this is something that's worth supporting. But having said that, we will go on to describe what this is all about. I have a blog, geoharvey.wordpress.com, where I go through the week's news on a day-to-day basis. I collect 10 or 15 news items every day, which I post links to at the blog, with each one with a little synopsis. And of course that puts me into a position where I'm exposed to a lot of news. And
you get these from all over the world.
All over the world, yeah. And I find them by doing searches, web searches. And I look at usually about 200 or 300, sometimes as many as 500 headlines every day. And I've been doing this for a couple of years, so I've looked at probably well in excess of 100,000 headlines in the last couple of years. But I collect them, and then I've got a good collection for the Energy Week show. And what I do is I read those so people can see what's going on. And I will invite my guests to interrupt me at any time. The first item, dating from the 20th, which was a Friday, is this: the EPA carbon plan. Coal loses, but nuclear doesn't win. Assuming that states generally adhere to the prime directive, I love that, of the Public Utility Resource Acquisition, not sure what that means, choosing the lowest cost approach, the proposed rule will not alter the dismal prospects of nuclear power. And this is from, believe it or not, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. Tom's not commenting. The next item, the Renewables 2014 Global Status Report says that 22.1% of the world's electricity was generated from renewable resources in 2013. 22.1%.
That's an incredible increase from just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's an incredible increase from what the United States is doing too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're moving.
We're moving. There's no question.
But still isn't fast enough.
No,
Yeah.
we're nowhere near Europe. We were in Scotland, and they don't get any sun. I mean, people.
Yes, they don't get sun,
bad weather.
but they have solar panels up.
But we were in a small village in Scotland, and probably 500 houses. We walked, and I took pictures of 24 houses that have solar panels on the roof. And dotting all the hillsides there are wind turbines.
Yes.
And they generate a huge amount of their energy. And one thing about Scotland is it always rains and it's always windy.
Yes.
But they still have a lot of solar panels.
Yeah.
And they're way ahead of us as far as
Yes,
deployments.
yes, absolutely. And my daughter lives in Glasgow,
Oh.
and she has commented on this to me a number of times. The percentage is expected to rise as countries across the globe pour money and resources into alternative clean energy. That's becoming a big deal in small countries all around the world. That article, by the way, is from the Wall Street Journal. The next one is this, from Insurance News Net. The nation's largest companies are leaving Washington gridlock on climate change behind and rapidly embracing renewable energy sourcing and greenhouse gas emissions reduction efforts, according to a new report from Calvert Investments. Now, on Saturday, I found this in the news. This is from the Energy Collective. Barclays' rationale for the downgrade they gave the entire U.S. utility industry. Now, I should refer back here to something, we had this, 2 weeks ago?
I think it was last week.
Last week.
This is a biggie.
This is a big one.
This is a huge one. Yeah.
Barclays has downgraded the entire U.S. utility industry. I don't remember an entire industry ever being downgraded before. But they downgraded the entire U.S. Utility industry, and now they tell us the reason. Their expectation that for more than 20% of U.S. electric consumers, solar combined with electric storage will be at least as cheap as power from utilities within 4 years.
And that's huge. And battery storage technology is really evolving to meet that challenge. But that's huge to say that it's going to be cheaper. I mean, for years we talked about parity.
Yes.
Getting to the point where solar makes sense to deploy on an economic scale with other sources of electricity. But they're saying within 4 years it's going to be cheaper for 20% of the U.S. population.
Not only cheaper, but cheaper if you include the batteries.
Right, that's amazing.
Which are the big expense for a system.
Very
so to
expensive.
Say that, and in all the math, it's always been without the batteries.
That's right.
And it's really for Barclays to have come out and said that.
And guess where in the United States those 20% of the people are going to be living?
I didn't see that. Where?
Well, you can think about this logically. It's the places where the electric power is the most expensive.
Why?
Because the solar panels and the battery storage are going to be more or less uniformly priced. But Hawaii is a big one. And the reason, of course, is because most of their power is from oil,
Fossil
which is
fuels
imported.
shipped, yeah.
Yeah. And another one is Alaska, because, and even solar panels are being put up in Alaska, believe it or not. And the third place, and I think really the most important place, even though the power is cheaper than it is in Hawaii, there's a lot more people, and that's New England and New York. And so I'm really expecting, I am paying 19 cents per kilowatt hour for power. And the reason is because I'm in Vermont and I'm buying cow power.
Yep.
And it would be cheaper for me just to go to solar.
And I think a lot of the smarter utilities are realizing that. I mean, Green Mountain
Absolutely.
Power is doing a
Absolutely.
lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
And some of the dumber ones are fighting it.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh dear.
I think about West Virginia. I mean, there are the coal places too that are just reliant, and their economies are reliant. I mean, it's like there's all the social problems inherent
Yes.
too.
Yeah. Although in certain places in the Ohio River Valley, there have been a lot of people who have been displaced because coal mines went out of business, and they have been finding work putting up wind turbines and solar farms and things. I don't know, but I've always thought of coal mining as probably one of the most painful. I've never done it. I've been in the chemical industry, but just the idea of working in a coal mine is something that I don't find attractive. But nevertheless, going on same day. That, by the way, was from the Energy Collective. I think I said that. There's an organization called Responding to Climate Change, and they gave us this news on the same day, which was Saturday. Climate change may drive a shift to more wind and solar power generation to conserve water. A U.S. DOE report said this week, thermoelectric power, including gas, coal, and nuclear, is responsible for 40% of U.S. water use.
Oh my God.
It's huge.
I got a little something up about exactly that.
Oh, here we go.
And the takeaway is energy is needed to pump, heat, and transport water, while water is needed to cool electricity generating equipment.
Yeah.
So they
was,
feed each other.
It was a
They're
revelation.
interdependent.
It was a revelation to me that even a nuclear power plant is using that heat to heat water to run the turbines. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought there was some other process, and that's why it
Right.
was nuclear,
Well, one of the things that I
Different
can't,
fuel, same process.
one of the things that I was told once, and it's kind of hard to forget, and I was told this by a guy who is an engineer at Vermont Yankee, was that the amount of waste heat from Vermont Yankee, if it could be used, would be sufficient to heat every house in Vermont.
There's something going on in New Hampshire and Keene and Claremont called district heating. And
Yeah.
they're capturing waste heat from some manufacturing plants.
Yes.
I
It's
wonder
big in
if
Europe.
Yeah, it's huge in Europe.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, if we're going to keep running electricity by heating water to turn turbines, if something like that wouldn't be possible here.
Well, it would be, but this is something that Tom and I have talked about from time to time. Brattleboro had a couple of organizations that were seeking to do a district heating system, and the fact that we had two of them worked to kind of undermine both, unfortunately. But the cost of putting in the district heating system that would really be used to do Brattleboro was high. And the cost of running a heat pump, which is an electric thing that you could plug in anywhere you've got grid power, or anywhere you're off grid and have sufficient battery backup to run it, a heat pump is about as expensive to run, if it's a good heat pump, as cordwood. And so it is it's probably one of our two cheapest resources. And so I'm wondering whether it would be cheaper if you had a good renewable resource for generating electricity, whether it wouldn't be cheaper just to generate more electricity, forget the district heating, except in places where it's really obviously an asset, which would mean maybe downtown Brattleboro, but not running out into the.
Where you are seeing this is in where they have control over the whole ball of wax, like universities,
Yeah,
college campuses,
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
and military installations.
yeah.
And it makes sense. It makes sense.
I used to teach in a private school, and the school had 320 students, and it had I think 280 of them were living in dormitories on the school, and almost all the faculty lived on the school, and it had a dining hall, and it had the schoolhouse, and it had the library, and it had you could go on and on and on with all of these buildings that were spread around a campus, and all of them depended on one heat source. So
It's good efficiencies. You get good economies of scale.
yes, and
the
it also
the loss of transmission is pretty low with
Yeah.
super insulated pipes that can.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. It's
Absolutely.
much lower than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something on the order of 2%, I believe they said,
per mile.
per mile. Correct.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you really, if you're running pipes under a street for 10 miles, that can get expensive. But if you're just talking about a central location where, I've been thinking in terms of if Brattleboro were generating all of its heat, all of its electricity, and a third of it came from biomass or something like that, it would make sense to have that third be generated as close to downtown as possible, which might be a mile away, and have
Heat.
heat brought into town. But the outlying areas, which would be no more than a mile perhaps from the downtown area, it would be cheaper probably not to
Not to do it.
and
Well, downtown,
put in-
everything's concentrated.
everything's concentrated. Yeah.
That being said, in Europe they do it, and some of them have been so successful that they've got a downtown heating plant.
Yes.
And then they pipe it out 17 miles to the next town. And provide service there too.
This reminds me of being in Heidelberg, getting on their trolley system early in the morning when I was a kid, coming in from the youth hostel and going to the trolley to take the trolley into town, and every stop, which was every block, every time we came to an intersection, they stopped and somebody got on, and there were a lot of women getting on with what looked like pizza boxes, and early in the morning, and I said, "What in the world is this?" And the person next to me said, "Oh, those are eggs."
Eggs, huh?
Those boxes
Oh,
are full
cool.
of eggs. The trolleys went far enough out into the countryside that the farm wives were getting onto the trolley to take their eggs to market.
So the takeaway from this thing, you talked about water or talk about boiling. You didn't think about boiling water.
Right.
Here's the facts. They call this process thermoelectric power. Okay, boiling water to make power. It accounts for 40% of all U.S. freshwater use. 40% of it, according to this article.
Just think about California and the drought they're having.
Well, that's the next sentence. Climate change, including more storms and droughts, would intensify those mutual risks. When severe drought affected more than a third of the United States in 2012, a lot of which was California, limited water availability constrained the operation of some power plants and other energy production facilities.
Including nuclear plants.
Among thermoelectric generation technologies, nuclear power was the most dependent upon water, withdrawing around 45,000 gallons per megawatt hour.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge. And people don't think about
The
this.
number's too high to even contemplate.
Well, this,
Compared to solar farms withdraw 0.
Yeah.
Well, you got it. No, you have to have a solar farm withdrawing something to water the grass. Or
just rain.
Just to think of it, maybe it doesn't need grass. You know, you have to think about these things, I guess. Okay, we're on to the next day, which was Sunday, I think, the 22nd. And this is from stltoday.com. Utilities, this is an opinion piece, utilities unsure of future as environmental regs loom. That's the title of the thing. Coal is under fire, gas and wind are blowing up, which I think is not a good term because it sounds like something bad, and in fact they're just growing. And consumers may yet wrestle control of power generation from their utilities. There is a lot on the mind of your average electric company executive these days. And of course, this is stuff we alluded to before. The next from The Guardian, and this deals with Australia. Polling from the Climate Institute shows 72% of Australians want to keep or expand the renewable energy target, which requires that 20% of energy is resourced from renewables by 2020, as the Abbott government considers abolishing the incentive. And we will be hitting more about that later on. So
I've got something about Vermonters on a poll saying exactly the same thing.
Really?
Wait till we get to it.
okay. If we don't get to it, you can show it anyway. The next thing, and this is from Crane's Chicago Business. As its nuclear plants increasingly look like an albatross rather than a boon, Exelon is at a crossroads. The so-called nuclear renaissance didn't happen, and the company would have to play catch-up with other new investments, or it could split off the nuclear generating business. These are people who, just a few years ago, were talking about how well they were positioned in terms of the marketplace, and now they've got a problem. And I really think that problem is getting worse. You know, Exelon was the company that said that it might close down 5 nuclear generators in Illinois. So the Illinois legislature said, oh, no, we're going to help you with this. But I'm not sure that the Illinois legislature's help is really going to be sufficient.
Do you think the downturn in the nuclear industry is because of what happened at Fukushima, or is it because people don't want it, or is it that the technology just hasn't really evolved in so many
Well, I
ways?
think the technology has not evolved. I mean, the small modular reactor, if you look at it, is better than the big reactors in some respects, but the technology is still a critical mass technology. It's still vulnerable to attack, despite what they say. I mean, the vulnerabilities, I think, are really kind of difficult to deal with. It still has the possibility of a meltdown. It still has waste to deal with that has been unsolved despite the fact that the federal government's been working on it for over 50 years. But I think the critical thing is that it's too expensive.
I was going to say the aging infrastructure. I mean, I could not understand why Entergy would even have wanted to buy Vermont Yankee when it was clearly near the end of its, like, what magical thinking, what was that?
Well, they made money on Vermont Yankee.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing.
I think they knew what they were doing, but you noticed that they walked away from it after it got its license. And that is exactly what happened at Kewaunee. And, you know, here we're seeing nuclear. Kewaunee was a you know, a kind of a dandy little nuclear power plant. There was no local anti-nuclear movement trying to shut it down. People had good opinions of it. It had its new license. It didn't have a history of maintenance problems. And do you remember which utility it was that shut that down?
No, I don't.
I think it was Dominion. I might be wrong. They just said, oh, well, we're going to sell it because we don't really want to have a nuclear power plant in Wisconsin. There's nothing else near it. And so they went to sell it, and nobody bid on it. So they said, okay, we're going to shut it down.
I think the bottom line is the economics aren't working anymore.
Yeah.
That's right. And as it gets, this is so funny. 2 years ago, they were in trouble because of wind. I mean, because of gas. Now wind is getting into trouble because gas is getting into trouble because of wind. And now the next thing that I think is going to happen is wind is going to be in trouble because of solar. And
I think you're right.
I hope so.
well, I like wind turbines. They're pretty.
I like them too. When we were out in Europe, they dot the hills. They're fun to watch.
I think
Yeah.
they're neat. Yeah,
It's nice to sit on a sunny day and just watch them spin. They
Yeah.
slow
We had an
rotation
article
speed,
about that.
you know.
Just exactly that. This lady moved nearby the wind turbines
Oh, I saw
because she
that.
liked to see it.
They are beautiful, but
Yeah.
you don't want to live too close.
Well, you know, every time I hear that, I think about Greensburg, Kansas, which is a little city that got completely demolished by a tornado, and they
Right.
rebuilt. And after they got their new wind farm to which was 3 miles away, they liked those wind turbines so much that they started building them in the city. And now there's nobody living in the city who isn't a quarter of a mile or less from at least 4 wind turbines.
Everybody's got a turbine.
Everybody's got a turbine, you know, and it's like the local hospital has got a wind turbine that if it fell over would land on the hospital roof.
That's true, literally.
It is, and what's the name? Best Western has a couple on, you know, to keep its.
The car dealer's got a few.
Yeah, it's
The feed and grain
there they
store's
are.
got a few.
And
I mean,
in fact, I wrote an article in for Green Energy Times called "Why in Vermont and Not Kansas," and you know I talk about in the thing about wind turbine syndrome and why it is that it happens in Vermont but it doesn't happen in Kansas. And there is an explanation from the Australian Medical Association, and I will refer people to the Green Energy Times to find out what the explanation is. But because I think we should be going on here.
Okay, all right. I'll save my question for after. Yeah.
You can ask your question. if you want.
No, it's what is it? Reveal it. But I'll go to your article. It's fine.
Okay, all right. I want to get through this fast enough that we can talk in the first hour about SolarFest, which, by the way, I have been quoted as saying, or at least could be quoted as saying, is one of the most important events in Vermont. Not that Vermont doesn't have lots of important events, but you know, SolarFest is certainly one of them. Let's see. Oh yes, on the 23rd. I guess the 23rd was.
Today's the 26th.
Yeah, I know that.
Work backwards.
Monday.
Was it Monday? Okay. Oh, this is sad. The Japanese Meteorological Agency reported Monday that the March through May period was the hottest in more than 120 years of record keeping. It is also the hottest May on record. This is all the more important because we're still waiting for the start of El Nino.
Yeah.
Oh boy. You know,
Scary. Weather is a scary thing. Right
well, you know, what's going to happen is it's going to continue to get worse until it gets better. And it's going to start getting better about 20 years after we quit putting carbon into the atmosphere. And it'll get worse until that point because it takes a long time to heat up a planet.
And a long time to cool it down.
And a long time to cool it down. But I have a great deal of hope for that. And we will go on. if you don't mind, to something which is more fun. Clean Technica, which is one of my favorite publications, told us on the same day, Germany's windiest area, the state of Schleswig-Holstein, will probably achieve 100% renewable electricity sometime this year.
Awesome.
Schleswig-Holstein has a goal to generate 300% of its electric consumption with renewables eventually.
Wow.
Now, you know, if you think about this, this ties into the grid transmission lines that
Gotta have a way to move that energy.
yeah, and they're connecting that with southern Germany, so the wind in the north supports the sun in the south, and they've got other grid connections. They've got a 700 megawatt submarine cable going from Denmark to the Netherlands. We talked about that last week.
There's Schleswig-Holstein up there.
Schleswig-Holstein.
This is the town of Lübeck.
Lübeck, which is an old city in the, what was that called? The
Hanseatic League.
That's right, you got it. The Hanseatic League. These people, when they were part of the Holy Roman Empire, they had their own army and their own navy, and they fought wars, you know, the Hanseatic League, and it was a big deal, and Lübeck was really one of the, and I think the Hanseatic League still exists, and they're still part of it.
I think technically it does.
Like Masons.
Yeah.
Such a strange thing, but you know, this is an ancient city, and Schleswig-Holstein, they're right up there in the north on the. In fact, I think Schleswig-Holstein is on the Atlantic and the Baltic.
The Baltic, if it isn't, it's awful close.
Well, I think it's the southern part of the peninsula
Yeah.
where the northern part is Denmark.
Jutland.
Jutland,
Yeah.
that's right.
Jawohl.
Jawohl.
These guys know everything.
Okay, perhaps we should go on. On the 24th, the day before yesterday, which was Tuesday, the Australian federal government's case to scrap or weaken the renewable energy target has been dealt a blow with modeling for it commissioned for the review showing consumers will be better off if the target is kept. This is from the Canberra Times. This is so interesting to me. It is such a cool thing. The federal government of Australia wants to get rid of the renewable energy target. They're kind of like, they want to have what they call a free market, which is in fact a market dominated by the coal companies. And they want to scrap the renewable energy target so they don't have to deal with wind farms and solar farms and stuff, because there's so much wind capability in Australia and so much solar capability that it's amazing they would consider anything else. But they want to scrap it in order to protect their coal companies, which I think there's a point later on here where I might talk about the amount of money they're putting into the coal companies every year.
It's all political.
It's all political.
And they've had a change in administration from a relatively liberal government to a conservative government. And you could have predicted it. You know, the pendulum's moving back and forth.
Yep.
The people support renewables, but the government that's in power doesn't. And the people are starting to stand up and say, wait a minute.
Well, we've got
representatives.
the picture of whole towns and possibly cities saying, we can make our own power. We're going to go off grid. And in Australia, that's something that's absolutely possible.
Well,
The nearest town is 300 miles away.
that's
So-
exactly
Well-
the reason why it makes sense in Australia.
Except that some of those towns are suburbs of the capital, Australian Capital Territory. And they're not 300 miles away, they're 50 miles away.
Okay.
So, you know, and I mean, they're talking about putting in communities that are suburbs of cities that will never have a grid tie. So,
It's interesting too, because there was just it was in Green Energy Times this morning about New Hampshire and how New Hampshire has is way behind other New England states as far as renewable energy deployment.
Yeah.
And it's because there's no regulatory consistency.
Yes.
It's a disservice to all the industries, coal included, to have kind of a bipolar policy that changes with election cycles.
Yeah.
Because nobody
Yep.
can make long-term plans.
Nobody
can
knows
make
what's
long-term
going on,
investments,
yep.
and nobody's going to spend millions of dollars putting in, whether it's a 3 million watt solar farm or a wind turbine farm or gas burning facility, if they think in 4 years everything's going to
Everything's
switch
gonna
back
change,
to,
yeah.
to what it was 4 years ago. There has to be some sort of long-term plan.
Well, I think the long-term plan is going to be generated in the marketplace. And I think that is something that at this point is looking more and more hopeful for renewable power because the marketplace is leaning more and more in that direction.
We got
And-
something interesting here about Australia.
What's that?
Just last week, they had a huge, it's wintertime down there.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had a huge winter storm
Yes, they did.
encompassing the entire nation.
Wow.
It looks a lot like a hurricane for me.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
Cyclonic.
and
Yeah.
the takeaway from it is the renewables, particularly the wind, generated record amounts of electricity during the storm. That picture up there is the exact storm.
Wow, that's amazing.
just not a storm, it is the exact storm. Total wind energy supplied to the states, New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria reached a record 2,600 megawatts at 10:30 p.m. Wednesday.
Yeah. Now, I want to point out that to anybody who knows about weather and isn't thinking would look like it's a front associated with a high because of the way that but it's in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah,
That's
so
a
it's
low.
the other way around.
Yeah.
Right, right.
And I think we're going to see more of that kind of thing coming along because the climate change is just doing that to us. Okay. Also, on Tuesday, we got this. At long last, America's first offshore wind project, Cape Wind, has secured its permits, leases, and finalized financing. Once turbines are erected miles offshore, it will begin producing most of the electricity for Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. That comes from the Hill. That's an interesting thing. They had over 20 lawsuits that were brought to stop that project, and it's interesting to see who took what sides on that too.
Yeah, it is. The Kennedys were on the wrong side.
Well, they were initially.
Not on my ocean.
Yeah, that's right. And Walter Cronkite was the spokesman for the organization that was against it until he
'Cause he-
decided that he didn't want to be the spokesman anymore and he wanted them to stop using his image.
Interesting.
That after about 3 years. And the Massachusetts Audubon Society came out in favor of the project. And when you look at the things that they did to test that project, it becomes clear why. Among other things, they did radar work on similar projects elsewhere in the world and found that migrating birds, when the turbines are big enough, the migrating birds will fly between them because they know not to go near the turbines. And another thing that's interesting, and this is the reason why Audubon would support that, is that on a per megawatt hour basis, for every bird killed by wind, there's about 40 killed by fossil fuels. So, that's where we are. And, they're starting to complain about bird kills by solar.
What?
And I'm talking about not concentrating solar, where I've seen,
Thermal, yeah.
but they're starting to see people. We're starting to see people say solar farms kill birds. The birds fly into the PVs just like they fly into people's windows. So
They fly into buildings.
They
do.
fly into buildings.
Yeah.
Solar
But nobody's
panels
counting
are
those.
angled, so I would think if a bird flew into it, it would just kind of bounce off.
Well, they very often bounce off the windows.
Right.
Yeah, but windows are like this. Panels up here, at least,
Yeah.
are like this. It's
Well-
really hard, unless they're flying straight down. Just-
They think that it's water. That's what the argument is.
Oh, that's interesting.
But even so, the number of birds killed by solar panels is so small compared to the number that are killed. Even nuclear is worse than wind turbines. How do you figure that one out? I mean, you're not.
Cooling towers.
Well, they did have one a couple of years ago. 30 years ago, somebody did a 2-day study during the migratory season at Crystal River in Florida, and they counted the number of birds that had hit the cooling towers and were dead on the ground below them on 2 days. And on the 2 days, there were 3,000 birds.
Wow.
So, you know, and these are one of those cooling towers was for nuclear, but the others were for coal. And that doesn't even count the number that are killed by pollution. Well, skyscrapers aren't too bad compared to houses, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, the birds don't see, and this is one of the they don't fly that high, which is also why they're not really bothered by wind turbines very much. There are very few birds that fly as high as a tall wind turbine. Among them happen to be the raptors, which is why, you know, occasionally you hear about an eagle being killed. But anyway, on we go. Next, renewables. This is from PV Magazine. Renewables have supplied 47.83% of the new electrical generation in the U.S. since the start of 2012. The share of clean energy is rising, with fossil fuel generation accounting for 54% of new capacity from the beginning of January to the end of May, according to according to FERC, which is the Federal Energy
Resource Commission?
I think it's Regulatory Commission. Right. Might be. That's an interesting fact. We're putting in renewables faster than anything else now. And my suspicion is that it's going to become a bigger and bigger share as time goes on. There were times last year when it accounted for 100% of what was installed during the course of a given month. Okay, yesterday on the 25th, we had several developments in the power sector, including the growth of smart meters and variable renewable generation have created an environment conducive to virtual power plants, which Navigant Research expects to be worth $5.3 billion in 2023. This from Virtual Strategy magazine. And you know what? In this one, I think Navigant Research is flat out wrong. I think it's going to be at least 4 times that.
Bring me up to speed. What's a virtual power plant?
A virtual power plant. And they have these things running in Germany right now. If in an ideal world for a virtual power plant, and things aren't ideal yet, but they are working anyway, you have a smart grid. And on the smart grid, you have automobiles that are being plugged in to get charged, and you have smart appliances and smart household circuits, and you've also got smart wind turbines and smart solar farms and smart everything else. And what happens is you have a computer somewhere, which is the virtual power plant. And its job is to balance all of this so that you can match the demand with the production. And if you think about this is an interesting thing. People talk about wind and solar as intermittent. And it's true, solar is intermittent, and if you're talking about a single wind turbine all by itself, it's intermittent. It will shut down from time to time, although you have to look at an area. And usually, you know, wind doesn't just shut down for an entire area. It can happen. But if the area is North America, it ain't going to happen. And, you know, the transmission lines, they had a 9.5 roughly percent loss per 1,000 miles in 30 years ago. By 20 years ago, or a little bit less, that was cut to about 6.5%. Today, you can put in transmission lines that are about 3% loss. Wow. 30 years ago, they were saying that high voltage AC was not cost effective to transmit at distances larger than 2,500 miles. Today, you can transmit if you've got the cables installed and they're new, you can transmit power from any place in the world to any other place in the world. All you need is that cable, which, you know, from Antarctica to Siberia is going to be a bit expensive, but Nevertheless,
We've got the technology.
we've
now.
got the technology
We
to
do
do
really
it.
have it.
What was the question I answered?
Well, we were talking about
virtual
virtual power plant.
We were talking about virtual power plants. The virtual
I've
power
got a little
plant.
something up here on it.
Okay.
Real quick.
All right, you do
rundown.
what you're doing, and I'll hang my head in shame.
Well, they call it's a rich diversity of independent resources
That's
tied
what it is.
together into a network via sophisticated planning, schedule, and bidding of distributed generation-based services. They bid on what power is available.
Yeah.
Virtual
Oh.
power plants represent a prime example of transactive energy, whatever that is, whereby new technologies such as demand response, what the people want out there and what we got to give them, okay? Solar voltaic systems, advanced energy storage, and this combination enable consumers to take a more active role in managing the energy they use. So this is your smart grid.
Yep. So your car is supplying power to the grid when the grid needs it, and you're getting paid for that.
Yeah.
And your car is getting power from the grid when the grid doesn't need it, and is paying a lower price for that.
Right, so you're buying when it's cheaper,
Yeah.
you're selling
Exactly.
when it's
Exactly.
higher.
Now,
You can
this is the
decide where
point
to
that I wanted to make. People complain about wind and solar because they're intermittent. Okay, if you think about this as not a question of is the electricity there or not, because it is there, but how well does the supply match the demand? A combination of wind and sun is better than nuclear.
As far as the real life demand.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the reason is, if you think about Vermont Yankee, for example, or any other nuclear power plant, in order for that power plant to supply power at the peak demand period, it has to run at full power when the demand is low. And the result of that was that just at the same moment that the Vermont Yankee plant was being built, they were building another plant 40 years ago down the Connecticut River 20 miles called the Northfield Mountain Plant. Are you familiar with that? Oh, you should know about this. Go to Vermont Yankee, look at it, and what you look at it from across the river, and what you will see is an industrial site. You go to the Northfield Mountain Plant and you look at it and you see a park, because that's what it is. You go into Vermont Yankee and you knock on the door and say, "Can I come in and look around?" And they will say, "You see this? It's an M16." You go down to Northfield Mountain, do the same thing, and they'll say, "Well, the museum is right over there, and you can see how it works." And you can go in there and you can see how it works, and you can go on trails for hiking, or you can go to a picnic table. You can do, it's a park. Cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, all kinds of things. Okay, what they're doing is they're taking water out of the Connecticut River and pumping it to a reservoir high in the mountains. And they're doing this when the price of power is very low. And then that's at night, and because Vermont Yankee is out there just chugging away, making power whether anybody wants it or not. And during the daytime, when the price of power is high, they run that same
They
water
sell it back.
and they sell it back to the grid, and they make money. Okay, if you can do that with nuclear power, guess what? You can do it with solar.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing about this is, this little rinky-dink scheme down at Northfield Mountain, what's its output? 160% of Vermont Yankees.
What?
1,080 megawatts. That's its output.
That's impressive.
This is not a ma and pa power plant. This is big.
It sounds like a very efficient energy storage
Well,
mechanism.
back
It
is
is exactly
yeah.
what it is.
This is
exactly
this is
what it
what
is.
pumped storage is.
We're planning on doing a show on exactly that.
Yeah, we're gonna do exactly what I just described. We're gonna go down and knock on the door.
See the M16.
Right. I don't think they're going to be mean to us, but you never can tell.
Strict.
Yeah. Well, they can't let us in. I mean, for
Right.
perfectly well understandable reasons. But at Northfield Mountain, I've been there, and they have a naturalist on hand You know, so if you have a snake that you found in your garden and you put it in a box and you take it down there, the naturalist will say, yeah, that's a garter snake. Not to worry.
That's so funny.
It is very
There's
cool.
a couple of others right around here
It's all
in the
about the
area.
approach,
There-
right?
There's one right at the Vermont-Massachusetts border, south of Mount Snow. That's also same kind of operation.
Really? Yeah.
There's something very similar at the Bennington, right around Hoosick Falls, Bennington, Wilmington area,
Is there?
where they pump water.
Well, the one I'm talking about is near Wilmington.
probably that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Yeah.
as you drive along Route 9, you see that
Yeah.
big reservoir. It's where that reservoir lets out.
Yeah, it took us a year to figure out what that was because we saw the penstock, we saw the water tank, and we were thinking of it going the other way. It
Okay.
just didn't
now-
dawn, and we couldn't figure out how the water got in the tank to go downhill to the penstock into the village where they must use this energy. And my daughter researched it on the way back from our IT last trip, and we realized that they're pumping the water up that hill into that tank
Yeah.
to generate electricity down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's all done
amazing.
by gravity. They're not pumping it because
No.
the reservoir is
Right.
uphill.
Yeah, but when you drive it, it's not obvious because
No,
it's
it,
pretty
it,
steep
it
climb.
looks like it's going up.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's
It's
an
amazing
optical,
engineering feat.
optical.
I'm not following this at all. Okay. The vast majority of Vermonters want to use less fossil fuel for their energy needs, but the cost of reducing one's carbon footprint is a perceived challenge, according to a survey the Energy Action Network released last week, and it came from vtdigger.org, and I gotta say, people should be educated.
Well, that's what
SolarFest.org.
SolarFest does.
I had a feeling you were going to say something about that.
I got a little
because
article.
Trying to do.
it's the perception.
Yeah.
That is incorrect.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And we've got some fantastic workshops this summer at SolarFest that address just that, how to finance solar projects. There's a community banking workshop on how to finance residential projects. We've got the largest commercial lending institution in Vermont that finances the commercial solar farms coming out and talking about what banks are looking for when they loan money.
Who is
It's
that?
Mascoma Savings Bank. They
Okay.
finance 5 out of the 7 2.5 megawatt solar farm deployments.
Yeah.
And they're a very conservative bank. They've been around for, I think, 2,000 years.
Conservatives in favor of renewable power.
Well, it's
and-
the economics.
It's
and
the economics, that's
so
right.
for a bank like that, you know, a locally owned bank to be so heavy into solar and renewables says a lot. It says a lot about
Yeah.
how far things have come in the past 20 years.
Yep.
But they're going to come out and do a workshop on what makes sense from a bank's perspective for finance.
That's a very cool
And
thing.
there's a lot of other workshops and vendors out there who can talk with folks about how they can afford this.
That's great. You know, it reminds me of the fact that in some places there is a green tea party,
Yeah.
which is in fact the Tea Party, but it is identifying itself as green. And in Georgia, the actual just ordinary Tea Party is coming out very much in favor of renewable power on the basis of financial policy and so forth. And it's just interesting to see that.
Energy independence is a big part of
Energy independence is a big part, and as a matter of fact, you know, we've talked about the fact for years in this country. We've talked about the fact that we are heavily influenced by foreign organizations, which have the ability to shut off the power, and the fact is, I think, if everybody just stopped supplying power or fuel to the United States, I think we would survive just fine. We'd have to tighten our belts in certain ways, but I think that we would survive just fine.
It'd be really bumpy for the transportation. That's
Well-
it'd be, especially in rural areas, it would be
Yeah.
really, it
Yeah.
would be, it will be
Yeah.
when it happens, because it is going to happen, I think.
Well, I think I'm hopeful that people are going to start moving in the direction of electric vehicles faster than some people might think. And if that happens, then it'll be a lot less bumpy. But yeah.
I
Anyway,
read something about the next revolution in electric vehicles is going to be motorcycles.
We have a workshop on that.
Well,
how about
there's
that?
a problem. First of all, apparently they're very fast and very fun to drive.
Yes.
But they don't make any noise.
Yes.
And we have a workshop on build your own electric motorcycle this
Do
year.
you?
Oh,
We have
really?
Ted Dillard's coming up from Massachusetts. He's built a couple of them, and he rode one of them up to the top of Mount Washington last summer. And very fast bike, doesn't make a sound. All you hear is the chain going around.
And you know, one of the things that I noticed when I was riding in Jason Cooper's Tesla with him,
Yeah.
he brought this up. He said that Tesla is actually considering making tires that make noise
Yeah.
Well,
for a reason. You
for
know, I
a
mean,
reason, exactly.
yeah.
So people hear you coming.
Right?
That's right.
I think big booming industry for the future is going to be playlists for the outside of your car. If they can regulate that the car has to make noise, you're going to be able to custom download a car tone, and maybe your car is going to sound like a chicken, or maybe your car is going to sound like a Harley Davidson or a spaceship. But
I can hear all the dogs in the neighborhood.
They're
Well-
trying something like that in downtown Brattleboro. We've got a little hotel here called the Latches. And if you go out in the backyard of the hotel, they're playing classical music.
Oh, they might be doing 24 hours a day. Every time I go by there.
Yeah, it's classical music. There's a reason for that.
I know.
The kids that hang out there don't like
To
it.
drive them away.
Well,
So clever.
actually, it goes beyond that, and that is that if you have classical music playing, there are certain things that people are less likely to do.
Like
And
fight.
Like fight. Yeah. Okay, the next item comes from Gazette.net, and that is this, and it's interesting to us locally. The Northeast Biodiesel diesel plant in Greenfield, Massachusetts has gotten a major boost toward becoming a reality with a $540,000 grant from the State Department of Energy Resources. That's Massachusetts State, obviously. The $3.5 million plant has been a work in process for 10 years. And my understanding is that $540,000 will put it over the top for what it needs to open up.
They need 350
Fantastic.
more grand, but they got it pledged.
Oh, they haven't
It's
pledged.
coming.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. I've been following this plant for a long time. I know some of the people involved, and it's been taking a long, long time. It's a dream.
Yeah,
It's community owned.
fantastic.
You know, it's 75% owned by this outfit called Co-op Power, and they in turn are owned by about 500 households, 500 families who have joined Co-op Power to take advantage of some of the programs they have, like they'll help you get solar. Mm-hmm. They got a real good deal on that, and if you want to have a solar building, what do they call it? Well, house raising.
House
kind of
raising,
thing.
yeah.
They have arranged things like
Oh,
that.
that's really great. What's the distribution going to be out of Greenfield? I mean, how far, do they?
From what I understand, their first aim is going to be going after institutions like schools, school buses,
Yep.
and that kind of thing. I'm sure they will have some retail distribution, because I know one of the people involved, and that's what he does. He sells these 5-gallon yellow diesel cans full of diesel fuel for about $50. So he'll probably be selling
Yeah.
those things, and who knows? I would not be surprised to see them put up a filling station. But I haven't heard that that's part of
Yeah.
the plan.
Now, you drive a diesel car that's powered by grease.
Yeah. Well, at least during the summertime, I use French fry oil in
Right.
my car. And unfortunately, they're doing this has made the availability of French fry grease
It's going to go
for
there.
people like me
Right.
much harder to get a hold of, because there's a market for it now.
Right.
Yeah.
There always was a market, but they left New England alone because we're too small. But it's really a big market, and some of the big people are in it. You may have heard of that nice organization, Mothers and Fathers of Italian Americans.
This isn't the organization that the Pope just excommunicated.
I think it's got a connection there.
Oh, dear.
They have been involved in rendering long before they started using it for fuel. But it's a natural, because they got all the equipment. So
Right.
they have the big contracts.
It's interesting that you would start an organization on prohibition of alcohol come to a point where you're selling used vegetable oil.
But they're just finding the niche always, right?
Yes, that's right.
it.
Yeah.
New Yorker magazine last fall had an article on exactly this and
I
how
missed it.
in the big cities there's turf wars
Over.
and they're stealing each other's oil.
And this
And
was
I haven't
stuff-
read the article,
this
but
was stuff
I'm
that restaurants used to pay to get rid of.
yeah,
Right.
yes.
Right. Well, you know,
Or dump.
this is a
Or dump.
typical thing about waste, is that people are finding more and more that waste has got value. And I mean, one of the ones that I keep referring to is the plant in London where they're putting up, I think it's 270 million pounds, which would be about $350 million in or more, a plant at that cost, which is just going to process restaurant waste. And the reason is because they're taking this, they're turning it into to high quality compost on the one hand and electrical power on the other. And this is big business, and it's happening everywhere. It could happen anywhere you've got a waste treatment plant. It could happen anywhere where you've got a collection of livestock. It could happen anywhere where you've got to get rid of forest falls or agricultural waste of any kind, or human waste.
No, right here in town.
Right here in
our
town.
Landfill organization that operates it is considering putting in a plant to digest.
It would be. It
restaurant
just
waste.
makes so much sense.
And we're just a little town.
Right.
Yeah. Now we've got less than 4 minutes to do 2 items here.
Stop interrupting.
The clock is going.
The clock is going. This is today's news. New organic, non-toxic, water-based batteries that last 5 times as long as lithium batteries have been developed. Created by researchers at the University of Southern California, the batteries would also be much cheaper than lithium batteries, about 10% of the cost. And these
10%.
things, 10%, which means that in terms of the lifetime of the battery, you're talking about 3 1/3% of the cost of lithium batteries. Now they did not talk about them being used in transportation or smaller devices. These are just grid storage they're talking about. So I suspect that these are big batteries.
Right.
But they're counterflow batteries, which means you've got 2 fluids that are running past each other with a membrane in between. And if this is turning into something that is real, which coming from University of Southern California, I kind of suspect that it very possibly is. This could be, this could be just a game changer in terms of
So
solar.
as far as bulk storage of utility power, this is it. I mean,
Yeah.
this could be it.
If it's
probably
so,
is it.
yeah.
And I did see a pilot plant on exactly this. And they had 2 huge silos or tanks full of 2 different chemicals. And basically, as you said, they move them back and forth
And that's the battery.
inside some sort of a black box. And if they want power,
they get
it out, and then they pour it back, and the liquid flows the other way, and it's recharged again.
Okay.
And it's sort of like pumped storage in a different way.
One more thing. The use of executive powers to regulate greenhouse gas emissions has been reaffirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court in a ruling on Monday. This suggests President Obama's climate policy has solid legal foundations.
Yay.
That from Carbon Brief.
Good to end with good news.
Yeah, well, we didn't have a lot of bad news in here. And
John
that, by the
Bowen's
way,
going to
is
sue
Tim-
over it.
Yeah. Well, he's suing over something else. But what I want to do here is I want to say goodbye to everybody who's watching us on Channel 10 in Brattleboro or whatever. But we're going to continue talking with the folks from SolarFest, and basically we'll probably take up an hour here just talking about SolarFest. And
We could take up 2-3 hours.
Good, but we don't have the studio for that long. But that'll probably be on Channel 8. There's no guarantee that it'll be on at all, but that'll probably be on Channel 8. So I'll say goodbye. I'm George Harvey saying goodbye. Here's Tom Finnell saying goodbye.
goodbye.
Steve
Goldsmith.
Smith.
Saying goodbye. SolarFest.org. Check out the
And
website.
Patty Kenyon and
Melissa Chestnut-Tangerman.
Chestnut Tangerman. Beautiful name. Okay.